There are so many events that can cause us fear that I fear like the evening news should come with the following warning. The upcoming broadcast may contain unrest and violence and economic insecurity and disease. This program has been rated for mature audiences only. Homegrown terrorists threaten to bring unrest from the Middle East right into our community. The arrest of an estranged son of a Boston police captain on July the 4th thwarted plans to explode a bomb in a crowded campus cafeteria, but who knows who is the next person to be radicalized, and who knows where that's going to happen. Look at Chattanooga, Tennessee this week. Last weekend there were 25 shootings in Baltimore, resulting in 12 homicides. That brought this month's total to 24, putting us on track to surpass May's total of 42. May was the deadliest month in Baltimore since 1980. Forest fires and flash floods, volcanoes, tornadoes, earthquakes, typhoons. There seems to be no end to the natural disasters devastating the land and making people miserable. Each daybreak brings us something new to be afraid of. Economic instability, layoffs at work. People are afraid to take one day off this summer or even limit their work to an 8-hour day for fear of losing their jobs. Ebola is still out of control in Sierra Leone, and there's a new respiratory disease in the Middle East, and people right here in our own congregation are battling cancer. And then there are the common fears that seem to affect everybody sometime in their life. Fear of being rejected and left out. Fear of never finding a life partner or a career. Fear for our children's safety. Fear of aging and losing our physical abilities and our independence. And finally, fear of death. Fear has a purpose. It warns us of potential danger. Fear encourages us to look both ways before crossing the street so that we don't get run over. Fear prevents us from eating foods that are moldy and going rotten, or it propels us to prepare for a final exam or book a doctor's appointment. Fear can also disable us, petrify and paralyze us. It can become a sin by infecting our relationship with God and with others, preventing us from being the lovely, loving people, and even causing us to harm ourselves or others. The Dr. Seuss story that I just read was What Was I Scared Of? Addresses those issues of fear. The story really has only two characters, a small, furry teddy bear-like Zeus creature and an unembodied pair of green pants. The cute little thing first encounters the scary-looking pants on a dark path in the woods at night. Now he claims he's not afraid, but he runs away as fast as he can. And then while fetching spinach from Greenwich, he is startled by the pants riding a bike through town, and he flees. And while fishing, he spies the pants rowing a boat, and he rows away so fast because he's frightened that he loses his hook, line, and bait too. The little guy's fear of the green pants clearly begins to have a negative effect on his life, as he no longer goes to the places he once went, and he no longer does the things he likes to do. He doesn't want to risk meeting up with the pale green pants. Many of us can identify with the little guy. Fear not only knocks at our heart, it moves in and spends the night. Fear can turn us into a control freak. Christian writer, theologian Max Lucado suggests fear, at its center, is a perceived loss of control. And so when life spins wildly, we grab onto whatever it is we think will restore that control. For example, the tidiness of our home, or the amount that we exercise, or the amount that we eat, or in many cases, other people. The more insecure we feel, the meaner we become. We growl, we bare our fangs because we feel cornered. Fear feels dreadful. Max Lucado describes the emotion well when he writes, "It sucks the life out of our soul. It curls us into an embryonic state and drains us dry of contentment. It also deadens our recall. It corrodes our confidence in God's goodness. It unleashes a swarm of doubts, anger-stirring, soul-parching, trust-erasing doubts." But imagine your life without fear, or at least not controlled by fear. What if faith, rather than fear, was your default reaction to threat? This is the possibility behind Jesus' question. "Why are you afraid?" he asks of the disciples in the middle of a storm in the center of a lake on a little boat. When I first read this scripture passage, I thought, why wouldn't they be afraid? They're cold, they're wet, it's dark, they're in the middle of the lake. Here's how Matthew remembers the trip. Jesus got into the boat. His disciples followed him, and a windstorm arose on the sea, so great that the boat was being swamped by the waves. The Common English translation calls it a huge storm. The King James Version describes it as a great tempest in the sea. Matthew didn't just use any word. He pulled out his Greek thesaurus and chose the word seismos, or quake, to describe the terrible, trembling eruption of sea and sky. A great seismos erupted on the lake. Lucado notes that Matthew used the word on only two other occasions. Once, at Jesus' death, when Calvary shook, and again at Jesus' resurrection, when the graveyard trembled. Apparently, he stilled the storm. Apparently, the stilled storm shares equal billing in the trilogy of Jesus' great shake-ups: defeating sin on the cross, death at the tomb, and here, silencing fear on the sea. Jesus understood humanity well. He understood us. Of the approximately 125 Jesus directives in the Gospels, 22 of them address fear. They say, "Do not be afraid. Do not fear. Have courage. Take heart." The second most common command, to love God and to love neighbor, Jesus only said 8 times. Listen to these encouragements from Christ. "Take courage, I am here," from the book of Matthew, chapter 14. "Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom," from Luke 12. "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am," from the book of John. Jesus' question is a good one because it thrusts us out of fear and right into God's grace. Jesus stepped out of his sleeping space in the stern of the boat to ask, "What are you afraid of, you of little faith?" And then he calmed the winds and waves. He handled that great quaking with great calming, and the disciples were left wondering, what kind of man is this? I'll tell you what kind of man he was. A human being, an ordinary man, completely filled with the divine divine love of God for sure, but still very human and subject to the same fears as the rest of us. Our second reading this morning was also written by Matthew, and it describes a time when Jesus battled fear. He was sad and anxious, says the Common English Bible. Sorrowful and troubled, says the NIV. Grieved and agitated, NRSV. Or as a translation of Mark's Gethsemane account states, Jesus plunged into a sinkhole of dreadful agony. The thought of Jesus struggling with fear about what was to come makes us uncomfortable. We want the calm Christ that controls the storm, not the one who is agitated and anguished by the thought of approaching event. Jesus was preparing for his death on the cross, a most sad and lonely and humiliating, painful death. And Jesus was afraid to death. He was deathly afraid. And what did he do? What he did with his fears shows us what we can do with ours. He prayed. My Father, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not what I want, but what you want. Jesus faced his fear with a simple, honest prayer. It was straightforward, and he named his troubles. He dragged his fears out of the dark and into God's light. The little creature in Dr. Seuss's story also ends up facing and overcoming his fears, although not by choice. He came face to face with the pants, and he yelled, and he screamed, and he cried, hoping to be safe from the pale green pants with nobody inside. And then a strange thing happened, says the little guy. Those pants began to cry. Those pants began to tremble. They were just as scared as I. We learn that we can overcome our fears not by running away from them, but by facing them. I'm often surprised when people are afraid of things they have never even tried. Like someone who's afraid of flying but's never even been in a plane. Or someone who's afraid to try a food that has never even been on their plate before. Or people who are afraid of those from another country, or those from another religion, or those from another ethnic background, even though they've never met people from that group. It makes me wonder what fears are limiting our ability to grow into our God-given potential. It makes me wonder what fears are limiting our ability as a congregation to serve in ministry. Are we afraid to share the gospel in our faith stories? Are we afraid to serve a certain kind of person or go to a certain location or neighborhood? Are we afraid that we're going to run out of money, time, and energy? When fear shapes our lives, safety becomes our God. When safety becomes our God, we worship the risk-free life. Full of fear, we can't love deeply because love is risky. We can't imagine the great things that God can do for us or through us because our imaginations are only full of negative outcomes. Fear blinds us to the wonders of God's kingdom. James Kemp, the author of the Gospel according to Dr. Seuss, says, theologically speaking, the opposite of faith is fear. The opposite of fear is faith. The presence of faith does not automatically remove the fears. Rather, faith provides us with the discipline, confidence, and courage to move forward in spite of those fears. Praying a simple prayer among friends, as Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane, is an example of the church in action. First, because we name our fears. Putting your worries into words disrobes them, and they look perfectly silly standing there naked. Secondly, Verbalizing our fears among trusted friends means that we are no longer alone with our troubles. God works through people. Christ distributes courage through community and dissipates troubles, doubts through friendship. It seems like each of us has one piece of the puzzle. And as we mix and mingle and confess and pray together, we put those pieces together and share our discoveries, and then Christ speaks to us. Wouldn't it be wonderful if being Christian meant the end to all of life's storms and smooth sailing every single day? Well, it's not that way. It's not the absence of storms that set us apart. It's who we find in the middle of the storm, Christ. Sometimes Christ can work in ways beyond our imagination to calm the seas and silence the wind. And sometimes he works with us side by side and keeps us calm as we journey through and endure that whole storm. But we are never alone. What are your fears? What's holding you back from becoming all that you could be? Can you identify your fears? If you can, face them, talk about them, pray about them, seek advice, learn how others have overcome that fear. Often when people move forward in faith, they find it was easier than they imagined it could be. The little Seuss creature not only got his life back as a result of facing the pants with nobody inside them, he also made a new friend. You are not alone. You are loved. Faith wins over fear every time. Amen.